What if the nation's top law enforcement officer was sitting on one of the most explosive secrets in modern history, then suddenly pretended it didn't exist? Because that's exactly what millions of people believe just happened. Attorney General Pam Bondi claimed earlier this year that the long-rumored Epstein client list was sitting on my desk right now. It was the kind of statement that sent shockwaves through Washington. For a brief moment it felt like the veil of secrecy around one of the darkest scandals of the century was finally about to lift. But months later that promise has vanished into silence. The files haven't been released, the public is still in the dark, and now lawmakers are demanding answers.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar. Donald Trump, when he campaigned, promised on day one he would end inflation and lower costs. Donald Trump lied to the American people, because we now know that inflation has continued to increase under his policies and that of Republicans. The most recent inflation report shows that inflation increased to 2.7% above expectations, and core CPI increased to 2.9%. We call on Trump and Republicans to focus on lowering costs instead of things like the big ugly bill that are kicking millions of people off health care. I've also noticed that there has been an uptick in activity around the Epstein files recently. I just want to remind the American people that in February of this year, Attorney General Pam Bondi acknowledged the existence of Jeffrey Epstein's client list. In fact, she said that Jeffrey Epstein's client list is, quote, sitting on my desk right now. Where is that client list? What is Attorney General Pam Bondi hiding? She needs to release the Epstein files as soon as possible. I talked about the Epstein files under the Biden administration. I'm talking about it under the Trump administration. This is a case of the powerful protecting the powerful. We need to have those files released. I also note that the Epstein files that have already been released show that Trump is all over the files. He's in multiple pictures with Jeffrey Epstein. There's multiple videos of Trump with Jeffrey Epstein. There are plane logs of Trump on Epstein's plane. There are statements by Trump about Epstein. There are court pleadings of alleged victims of Epstein naming Trump. So we need to have these Epstein files released. I also want to talk a little bit about Ukraine. The only way we get Vladimir Putin to the negotiating table is to defeat Russian troops on the battlefield. I support President Trump's decision to send Patriot missiles to Ukraine. I support President Trump's decision to say that he's going to backfill Europe's military equipment when Europe sends military equipment to Ukraine. And that is how we're going to get Putin to the negotiating table, by letting Putin know that he cannot win this war. And with that, I yield back.
What happened to that list, and what is Pam Bondi really hiding? It all started when Ted Lieu stood up in a hearing that wasn't even supposed to be about Epstein. The agenda was inflation and cost of living, another typical political session, but Lieu's tone was different. He didn't want to talk about budgets or interest rates. He wanted to talk about the truth, specifically the truth sitting in a locked drawer somewhere inside the Department of Justice. Looking straight into the camera, he asked the question no one in power seems willing to answer: where is the client list you said was on your desk? That one line cut through the political noise like a blade. Because if the Attorney General really does have that list, then this isn't just a matter of bureaucracy, it's a matter of power, of justice, and of whether the most powerful people in America are being shielded from the consequences of their actions. For context, this isn't the first time a politician has pressed for transparency around the Epstein files. Over the years, several members of Congress have demanded that the full record be made public, from court documents to investigative notes. But every time the pressure builds, the same wall appears: classified investigations, sealed evidence, and vague statements about protecting privacy. And yet when Bondi made her bold claim about having the client list in hand, people believed for a moment that maybe, just maybe, justice was finally within reach. That's why Lieu's question hit so hard. It wasn't just a political jab, it was a wake-up call. You see, the phrase Epstein client list has taken on an almost mythical status online. To some, it's the smoking gun that could expose how the world's elite protected one of the most notorious predators of our time. To others, it's a distraction, a ghost story used to stir outrage and clicks. But there's no denying that it symbolizes something real, the belief that accountability stops where power begins. When Bondi said the list was on her desk, she turned that belief into expectation. And when she went silent, that expectation turned into fury. After the hearing, Bondi's team quietly walked back her words, claiming she wasn't referring to an actual list but rather to general files related to the Epstein case. It was a small technical clarification, but one that raised even bigger questions. If it wasn't a list, what was it? And if it was a misunderstanding, why wait months to clarify? That kind of hesitation fuels the very suspicions she's now trying to quiet. And make no mistake, people noticed. Behind the scenes, the Department of Justice released a carefully worded memo saying there was no evidence of an official client list. According to their statement, the Epstein investigation was concluded, and any further disclosure of materials was deemed not appropriate or warranted. That phrase, "not warranted," sent social media into overdrive. Critics called it a cover-up. Supporters said it was standard legal procedure. But the bigger issue isn't whether a document exists, it's the pattern. Every time accountability gets close to touching power, the story changes. Files disappear, statements get rephrased, and the truth becomes classified. What makes Ted Lieu's question so powerful is that it exposed this pattern in real time. During a televised session, while the world was watching, he forced the Attorney General into a corner. "You said it was on your desk," he reminded her. "So where is it now?" It wasn't just a question, it was a dare. And Bondi's refusal to answer directly made it worse. Because silence in politics is never neutral. It's a choice, and in this case, it's a choice that keeps the public wondering who exactly she's protecting. As the days passed, journalists started digging again. Archived interviews, flight logs, photos, old witness statements, everything was back under the microscope. Online forums filled with speculation. Was Bondi pressured to retract her statement? Were their names on that list too powerful to expose? Was the Department of Justice running interference for political reasons? Nobody had solid proof, but that's how scandals like this thrive, in the space between what's known and what's hidden. And that's where this story gets even stranger. Because when you dig into the released portions of Epstein's files, something jumps out: hundreds of redactions, sealed affidavits, and entire pages blacked out. The reasoning given is always the same: ongoing investigations, victim protection, legal privacy. All valid reasons on paper. But the longer it goes on, the more it feels like a shield. A way to keep the public guessing while the truth stays locked away. And if that's the case, then Bondi's "list on my desk" comment wasn't just a slip-up, it was a glimpse behind the curtain. Ted Lieu seemed to know that. That's why he framed his question the way he did, not as an accusation, but as a challenge to transparency. He wasn't saying he had the list, or that he knew who was on it. He was reminding the country that justice doesn't work in the dark, and that's what made his moment so powerful. It wasn't partisan theater, it was an attempt to drag one of the most uncomfortable conversations in America back into the light. Meanwhile, Bondi's defenders argue that her statement was taken out of context, that she was referring to the ongoing process of reviewing documents, not literally holding names in her hand. But even that defense doesn't explain why the Department of Justice refuses to commit to releasing what it does have. If transparency was ever the goal, where's the transparency now? You can't promise the truth one day and then hide behind procedure the next. That contradiction is exactly what keeps this controversy alive. And here's the thing most people miss: this isn't just about one case, it's about trust. When citizens start to believe that certain people are too connected, too wealthy, or too politically important to face accountability, that's when faith in the system collapses. That's why moments like this matter. Because the question isn't just where's the list, it's who decides what we're allowed to see. And that's a question with consequences far beyond one scandal. If you think this sounds familiar, you're not wrong. History is full of examples where the truth was buried under the weight of influence, files sealed for decades, investigations quietly closed, whistleblowers ignored. What makes this one different is how public it's become. Every statement, every clarification, every awkward pause is dissected online in real time. Bondi may have hoped her words would fade, but the internet never forgets. Screenshots of her quote circulate daily, usually paired with one simple question: where is it? And that's the power of perception. Even if no list exists in the form people imagine, the idea of it has already taken root. It represents everything people suspect about the justice system, its bias, its secrecy, its willingness to protect the powerful. When that perception hardens, no official statement can erase it, and that's what makes this situation so dangerous for Bondi. The more she avoids the question, the louder it becomes. Ted Lieu, to his credit, didn't just stop at asking once. He kept the pressure on, calling for a timeline of document reviews, demanding an accounting of what's been withheld, and even proposing legislation to make all Epstein-related files public with necessary redactions for victims. Whether that proposal succeeds or not, it's already made an impact. Because every time the subject comes up, it forces the Department of Justice to answer for its own double standards. Behind closed doors, sources inside the DOJ reportedly described concern over the public reaction. Some officials were frustrated that Bondi's remark turned into a viral controversy. Others were angry that lawmakers were using the Epstein case for political leverage. But the truth is, if there had been transparency from the beginning, there wouldn't be leverage to use. It's secrecy that breeds speculation, and once speculation starts, it takes on a life of its own. Meanwhile, survivors of Epstein's network continue to push for full disclosure. For them, this isn't about politics, it's about closure. Many have said that until every name connected to the case is made public, justice will always feel incomplete. Their voices add another layer of urgency that Bondi can't ignore. It's not just lawmakers demanding answers now, it's the very people her department promised to protect. The irony is that Bondi built her public image around accountability. As Attorney General, she vowed to clean up corruption, expose wrongdoing, and restore trust in institutions. But now she's at the center of a transparency scandal of her own making. And the longer she waits to explain, the harder it becomes to believe that silence is just procedure. Even in the broader public eye, this story has evolved beyond the specifics of one investigation. It's turned into a test of credibility. When an official says one thing and the department says another, the public's faith erodes. And that's what makes this moment so dangerous, not just for Bondi, but for the idea of justice itself, because justice depends on belief. The belief that laws apply equally, that truth wins out, that nobody gets special treatment. When that belief fades, the system collapses from the inside. So when Ted Lieu asked, "What is Pam Bondi hiding?" it wasn't just political theater, it was a reflection of what millions are asking. Because every delay, every deflection, every redacted page feeds the suspicion that something bigger is being buried. Maybe there's no single list. Maybe it's a series of documents, flight manifests, correspondence logs, pieces of a puzzle that together tell a story too uncomfortable to publish. But if that's the case, then hiding behind semantics only deepens the mistrust. As this story keeps unfolding, one thing is clear: the Epstein case isn't finished. It's paused, contained, managed, but not over. Every time someone in power tries to close the door, another voice opens it again. That's the cycle of secrecy. It never really ends, it just waits for the next whistleblower, the next leak, the next hearing. And maybe that's why the question haunts Bondi so much, because deep down, she must know it's not going away. There's a lesson here, not just for politicians, but for the public watching. When officials promise transparency, hold them to it. When they try to change their story, remember their first version. Power doesn't protect the truth, it protects itself. And in the end, the truth only comes out when people refuse to stop asking. So maybe Ted Lieu's moment in that hearing will be remembered not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. The silence spoke louder than any headline. A silence that said, "You're not supposed to ask that." A silence that said, "Some doors stay closed." But that silence is exactly what keeps the story alive, because as long as the truth stays locked away, someone will keep knocking. And here's the twist: the more Bondi tries to move on, the more this moment defines her. You can't promise justice and deliver shadows. You can't hold the nation's trust in one hand and hide the evidence with the other. The public deserves better. The victims deserve better. The country deserves better. So where does that leave us now, with a question that refuses to die? A list that may or may not exist, and a government that can't decide whether to confront the truth or bury it. But one thing's for sure: every time someone asks, "Where is it?" another layer of the story peels back. And eventually, the truth always finds a way out. Because justice doesn't hide in a drawer. It doesn't vanish behind red tape or legal jargon. It lives in the open, where everyone can see it. And until that happens, the people asking for answers aren't the problem, they're the solution. If you believe sunlight isn't partisan, if you think transparency shouldn't depend on who it embarrasses, make sure you're subscribed to the channel.